Welcome to the Republican Professor. I'm your host, Dr. Lucas J. Mather. California's magazine ban is unconstitutional, so says Ninth Circuit Judge Bumatay, Trump appointee. We're on page 84 of Duncan versus Bonta. This was filed on 20 March 2025. With this framework in mind, we turn to California's magazine ban. First, we examine whether the Second Amendment's plain text covers the Constitution, covers the conduct that California regulates. It does, and because California's magazine ban fits within the amendment's textual elements, it's presumptively unconstitutional. Second, we evaluate whether California has overcome the presumption of unconstitutionality. It must do so by justifying its law under our historical tradition of firearms regulation. It hasn't. Thus, California's magazine ban is unconstitutional. A, California's magazine ban is presumptively unconstitutional. A very important point here. This is a really huge issue. It was settled in Bruin. I think it was settled in Heller and McDonald, but Bruin reinforced it. And so we continue. We just have to keep pounding this same thing, according to Bumatay, and I agree with him. California's ban prohibits people from owning, possessing, or selling any magazine holding more than 10 rounds and forces people to surrender magazines already in circulation to the government. As a result, California's ban infringes on the right of the people to keep and bear magazines. um, Bear, as Bruin said, explained that bear naturally encompasses carrying handguns publicly for self-defense, and at a minimum, keep means the possession of firearms in the home at the ready for self-defense. Thus, California's magazine ban easily fits into the Second Amendment's textual elements, which makes it presumptively unconstitutional. Rather than accept this obvious conclusion, the majority, and again, he's writing, recall this, he's writing in dissent to the en banc panel. This is the third episode we've done on this, so we're on page 84. You can get it at uscourts.gov. I'll put a link to it in the description below on YouTube. Okay. If you can't find it on the Apple Podcast link on your computer, because the Apple Podcast does, for some reason, does not show you the entire description on your computer. On your phone, it does. On the iPad, it does. So if you have an iPad or a phone with the iPod app, pull up Apple Podcasts, you pull up this podcast, the entire description you can see on your phone, and you can also see it on an iPad. But for some reason on my computer, when I pull it up, I can't see the entire description. I'm not sure why. You can also see the entire description on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, you'll see that. So I'll put a link to it in the description. Of course, you can also go to republicanprofessor.com and it will be there as well. Anyway, if you search Ninth Circuit, um, Duncan versus Bonta, March 2025, you'll see it. Okay. That's what I'm going by right now. I'm just citing my source here, guys. Okay. Rather than accept this obvious conclusion, the majority contends that these magazines are not even arms under the Second Amendment. That's wrong. Number one, magazines are arms. Now, I want you to pay close attention to this because this is a novel theory of the en banc panel. This is the fourth time the en banc is, which is extremely weird. This is very odd to have four en bancs, and they change their reasoning every time. They get the same result, but they change their reasoning. Makes you wonder what's going on there. Do they just need this result no matter what the reasoning, and they just have to come up with reasoning? They're not getting their reasoning from Bruin. They're not getting their reasoning from Supreme Court precedent. And so that's what Bumate is saying here. Okay, he's saying in dissent, joined by some other judges, that that the majority has this wrong and the Supreme Court needs to take this and reverse this. Magazines are arms. Magazines, whether they hold 10 rounds, more than 10 rounds, or fewer than 10 rounds, are unquestionably arms under the Second Amendment. As a textual matter, arms include any weapons of offense or armor of defense or anything that a man wears for his defense or takes into his hands or useth in wrath to cast at or strike another that is carried for the purpose of offensive or defensive action. That's from Heller at 581. Arms then extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding. At a minimum, the meaning of arms covers modern instruments that facilitate armed self-defense. That's from Bruin at 28. California's ban applies to instruments that are necessary to the operation of most modern firearms for self-defense. A magazine is not a container or detachable receptacle in a repeating rifle, machine gun, containing the supply of cartridges that which are, sorry, I got that wrong. A magazine is a container or detachable receptacle in a repeating rifle, machine gun, etc., containing a supply of cartridges which are fed automatically to the breech. That's Oxford English Dictionary. Online. Oh, I don't like online dictionaries there, Judge. As that definition makes clear, the magazine is part of the firearm. It stores and continuously feeds cartridges into the firearms chamber. All right, 2024 Oxford English Dictionary seems to supply this necessary support for the fact that they're arms. Firearms with detachable magazines, most commonly owned firearms, simply cannot fire as designed without a magazine. Indeed, some firearms won't even fire a single shot without an attached magazine. Yeah, in California. Did you guys know that? California required for years and years and years many models of semi-automatic pistol to have a feature where if there's no magazine, you can't fire it. So it's definitely part of the firearm, the magazine. But, pay attention to what he's saying here. Um, wow. So, and so when a person uses a firearm in self-defense, the person must operate both the firearm and magazine together. Without the magazine, the firearm would be practically useless for self-defense. Let me just double check and make sure I'm hitting my notes. Okay. All right. I'm on page 86. I just say that's why people want them. That's why they want them, because they're necessary. Because magazines are necessary component of using firearm in self-defense. They are integral to a bearable instrument that facilitates armed self-defense. By its nature, the Second Amendment's protection of arms must extend to their functional components. If magazines and other components weren't included, the Second Amendment would be a shallow right, easily infringed by basic indirect regulation. So this is a reductio ad absurdum form of argument where you show that the opponent's premises together with their reasoning provide an inference to a ridiculous conclusion. You're then permitted, to say it nicely, and required would be a better way to say it, to go back and fix the problem. You go back to the premises or the reasoning and you fix it. And reductio ad absurdum form of argument is very powerful if you can pull it off, because it shows that you must reject the argument made by your opponent. And if you can fix it up and then you get a different conclusion, or uh, you get the same conclusion with different reasoning, but usually you want a different conclusion, then all the better for your position instead of your opponent's. That's the form of reasoning he's using here. So um, our Constitution thus implicitly protects, I love this, implicitly protects closely related acts necessary to the exercise of enumerated rights. After all, there comes a point at which the regulation of action intimately and unavoidably connected with a right is a regulation of the right itself. That's why the Second Amendment protects necessary concomitants to the right to bear arms. Um, So the Second Amendment's scope includes corollaries necessary to firearms use for self-defense, like the right to learn how to keep firearms ready for their efficient use. Um, well, I love this. I'm on page 87. I'm coming into page 87. It would include the right to obtain bullets necessary for to use firearms and the right to possess magazines necessary to render firearms operable. And once properly understood as arms, magazines of all stripes, including those holding more than 10 rounds, are protected. After all, the government can't limit the people to government preferred types of magazines any more than it can limit the people to government preferred types of firearms. Um, That's from Heller at 629, holding that the government can't forbid handguns because long guns are available. And actually, in that case, I don't know if you saw that. If you ever need, you got to read Heller at some point. That this is how crazy they were. Back in 2008, the Democrats, who entirely controlled the city of DC, and they still do, prevented and criminalized a DC police officer from keeping a handgun at home for self-defense and keeping a long gun at home for self-defense. I mean, these people are crazy. They're absolutely insane. Which, by the way, communists, Nazis, same thing. Socialists of all stripes want to restrict these kinds of rights. Socialists of all stripes love to criminalize innocent conduct. It's their hobby. They can't help it. Well, okay. The majority sees things differently. Yeah. Although the majority begrudgingly concedes that magazines are generally protectable arms and that large capacity magazines enhance a person's ability to defend himself, it nonetheless excludes the large capacity, so-called, magazine from the protection of the Second Amendment. And it does so using questionable reasoning. Let's try to explain the majority's analysis. The majority first draws a constitutional distinction between arms and accoutrements. According to the majority, arms and their necessary components are protected by the Second Amendment, but accoutrements or firearms accessories are not. Some of you guys see where this is going. It then reasons that a magazine by itself isn't an arm protected by the Second Amendment. That's because magazines are, quote, harmless, unquote, when not attached to an accompanying firearm. Well, why would you want to ban it then if they're harmless? When not attached to a accompanying firearm, so they can't reasonably be described as a weapon of offense or armor of defense. Now, this is such insane reasoning. I can if the Supreme Court doesn't take it, I'm going to be heartbroken. This needs to be slapped down. I mean, Supreme Court, if you're hearing me, are you hearing this argument here? Are you hearing it? Um, yeah. Democrats out there, if you're reasonable, can you get on our side on this? Because it would really help. It really would help. If we get some Democrats that have some brain cells on this stuff. Um, Nor is a so-called large capacity magazine a protected component of a firearm, says the majority, because no firearm, quote, requires a magazine holding more than 10 rounds to function normally. Uh, Stringing this together, page 88, the majority claims that large capacity magazines are not arms under the Second Amendment. The majority's analysis is flawed for at least three reasons. First, magazine is simply not an accoutrement, it's a necessary firearm component. No antebellum dictionary describes accoutrement to include firearm components. Um, Instead, they define accoutrement as attire, garb, furniture, dress, equipment, furniture related to a person, trappings, ornaments, dress, habiliments, particularly after a warlike manner, in the military sense, signify habits, equipage, or furniture of a soldier, such as belts, pouches, cartridge boxes, saddles, bridles, etc. Uh-huh. Yep. And then footnote 7 in the military context, equipage is all kinds of furniture made used by the Army, such as tents, kitchen furniture, saddle horses, baggage, wagons, bat horses, and there you go. In a military sense, signify habits, equipage, furniture of a soldier, such as buffs, belts, pouches, cartridge boxes, etc. Dress, equipage, trappings, ornaments, dress, equipage, furniture of the body, appropriately military dress and arms, equipage for military service, equipage, trappings, ornaments. Well, that's quite a few different dictionaries that are antebellum. Now, why is he using antebellum dictionaries? You guys know what this term antebellum means? I'm highlighting it here. Antebellum, anti, A-N-T-E, B-E-L-L-U-M. It's a Latin word. It means before the war, before war, before the Civil War. Why are we using antebellum dictionaries? Because in this kind of constitutional context, you're supposed to present the historic, original public understanding of these terms. We don't import new understandings and read them into the text of the Constitution. We try to exegete the Constitution, not eisegete, not put our ideas into them. No modern magazine would fit within the definition of accoutrements, and the size of the magazine wouldn't matter either. As a necessary component of the functioning of the firearm, it's not part of the habits, equipage, furniture of a soldier. Under these definitions, now I want you to see this. It's so important to get definitions right. Focus, focus, focus on definitions. Focus, focus, focus on definitions. Okay? Get the definitions right. Under these definitions, magazines, including those holding more than 10 rounds, are not accoutrements. Instead, they are protected components of arms like triggers and barrels. Ignoring these facts, the majority merely asserts magazines are no different than cartridge boxes and belts that hold bullets. Second, I'm on page 90 now. We're cruising through the majorities. Fox, Fox Solomonic, Faux Solomonic. It's F-A-U-X. I like to say Fox. It's a Fox Pass to say Fox Pass that way. Second, the majority's faux Solomonic splitting of magazines based on the number of rounds they hold makes no sense. Wow, that's so great. That's a great quote. This shouldn't even survive even rational basis scrutiny. Holy cow. The majority concedes that magazines holding 10 or fewer rounds are perfectly legal, integral components of arms entitled to the Second Amendment's fullest protection. Quote, the Second Amendment's text necessarily encompasses the corollary right to possess a magazine, just as it protects the right to possess ammunition and triggers. And common sense dictates that just because a magazine holds more than 10 rounds doesn't transform it into an accoutrement. Yet the majority seems to possess magical abilities. As soon as you add one more round, poof, the magazine is no longer integral and it disappears from Second Amendment's ambit of protection. Call this the magic bullet theory of the Ninth Circuit. Wow, this is pretty powerful. So the majority's arms versus accoutrements distinction proves too much. Either a magazine is an accoutrement, which states may ban completely under the majority's theory, or it's an arm, which affords it Second Amendment protection. The majority can't seem to make up its mind on where magazines fit. The majority won't and can't go so far to say that magazines may be prohibited outright, but in the next breath, it says some magazines aren't protected at all. This accoutrement distinction is thus baffling and unhelpful. In the end, even the majority abandons the distinction as it considers that some accessories are necessary for the ordinary operation of a weapon. That's a direct quote from the majority and fall within Second Amendment's protection. That's at 27. That's a pretty devastating argument there. That is pretty devastating. Whenever you can use your opponent's words against him because they slipped up and their argument is so bad that their own argument goes against their own theory, well, then you're doing well. And we want to thank Judge Bumatay for doing this. Third, the majority misunderstands the Second Amendment's inquiry. According to the majority, the proper inquiry is whether the component is necessary uh, the opponent or accessory is necessary to the ordinary operation of the weapon. Not whether, I'm on page 91 now, whether when one voluntarily chooses to use it as an optional accessory, the accessory is attached to the weapon. But that's wrong. The relevant test of the Second Amendment isn't what's strictly necessary for self-defense. Rather, the Second Amendment inquiry centers on what the people choose to facilitate armed self-defense. As we've said before, lawful purpose, not necessity, is the test. Indeed, wow, this is so great. Lawful purpose, not necessity. Say this to anybody that says, why do you need? Why do you need? Why do you need? Why do you need? Blah, 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 blah. Well, that's interesting question. I could ask you the same thing about your 10 purses that you have. But the issue is not need, it's not necessity, it's lawful purpose, right? If you have a lawful purpose, there is no place for the inquiry of need. Indeed, the Supreme Court has already rejected the majority strictly necessary for self-defense theory of the Second Amendment. Of course they did. In Heller, the government argued that its handgun ban was permissible because it allowed citizens to use long guns for self-defense. So, in the government's view, handguns weren't strictly necessary because citizens could defend themselves with other weapons, right? The court forcefully rejected the argument. Here's a block quote. It is no answer to say that it is permissible to ban the possession of handguns so long as possession of other firearms, long guns is allowed. It is enough to note that, as we observed, that the American people have considered the handgun to be the quintessential self-defense weapon. Whatever reason, handguns are most popular weapon chosen by Americans for self-defense in the home, and a complete prohibition of their use is invalid. And man, there's a great quote that the government cannot ban long guns so long as sabers are permitted. Uh, Kavanaugh used that in his dissent in 670, the Federal Report of the Third Series, in Heller versus DC. I think it was the second time around, Heller 2. That was in 2011. Thus, the Second Amendment grants citizens the choice of commonly owned firearms to protect themselves. The government doesn't get to decide for the people. Page 92. And we would never be so parsimonious when it comes to other constitutional rights. Imagine granting only what's strictly necessary for enjoying the free speech or free exercise of religion right. Well, can you imagine that? Well, we went through that briefly in 2020, 2021 with the lockdowns. No court would tolerate that. That's like saying, well, Don't speak too fast, Mr. Bumatay. That's like saying that as long as the government permits speech through print or airwaves, it may ban speech on social media platforms because they're mere optional accessories for spreading information. That people remain free to employ other means to disseminate their ideas does not make restrictions on their free speech outside the bounds of the First Amendment protection. It's also like saying that the government can ban religious worship at home because it's not strictly necessary when churches and synagogues are available. I think we saw a version of this during the lockdowns there, Mr. Bubate. The example could go on, but it bears repeating. The Second Amendment is no second-class right, subject to an entirely different body of rules than the other Bill of Rights guarantees. Amen. And that's what Thomas was saying for years in his dissents to the denial of cert. Thus, the majority's attempt to carve out magazines holding more than 10 rounds from Second Amendment protection of arms is wrong, both as a matter of firearms operations and constitutional law. Number two, the common use question. Now, we're going to stop here and we're going to get to the common use uh, question later. Thanks for joining me on the Republican Professor podcast. And it is 29 April 2025, years after Jesus. It's a Tuesday. See ya.